All right, welcome everyone. Today we have our guest Chris Tuff. So Chris Tuff is a best-selling author and highly sought-after keynote speaker who's presented at Nike, Harvard, Home Depot, Verizon, and some other great Fortune 100 companies. His two books, The Millennial Whisperer and Save Your Asks, are two of the big reasons why I wanted to have him on the show today. And to start things off, Chris, let me ask you, you've said that your purpose is to inspire and connect. So, what does that look like and feel like to you?
So I think it's interesting. First of all, thanks so much for having me on the show. And this is going to be super fun. So listeners, buckle up. And my brother says that I have a passion disorder because I get so excited about the stuff I talk about. But it actually leads me to when it was probably 12 years ago that I came up with my purpose. And I remember I was going to see my executive coach who I was set up with because I was the youngest partner at this super fast growing company. And they're like, all right, Chris needs some guidance here. Right. And I remember my homework was to come up with my purpose statement. And I knew it had to start with two. And it was 3 minutes before I was meeting with her. And I was like, crap, I got to do my homework. And on a whim, I just said, okay, if I'm going to call it down, it's to inspire and connect. And I'm like, wait a second. I thought about it for 2 minutes. I was like, wait, that's actually a great catch-all for everything that I do. And so I wrote it down. She said that's perfect. And I like how short it is. And I tell audiences, I'll actually do a raise of hands of how many people know their purpose. And it's only about 25% of any audience that knows their purpose. I think it's the most important thing we can do, put a stake in the ground so we can start taking ourselves towards that. And that should act as the filter for what we end up going all in on and what we say goodbye to. And so it's really to inspire and connect is the backbone of everything that I'm doing. And then, obviously it was many years later that I wrote a book all around connection inward, which is the Millennial Whisperer, and then connection outward, which is Save Your Asks. And so I've always been obsessed with connection. And so my first job was helping to build the social media infrastructure for advertisers and to make the world a more connected place. And how my first book was born was it was really out of I looked at my life and I was living a largely disconnected life, and it manifested itself as my rock bottom as I struggled with my relationship with my family. They had become a second priority as I hobnobbed around the world and was playing the status game. And I looked at the connection just with myself, and my success metric was beating my brothers at the game of life. And then the company that I helped build to 400 employees, the connection with them was largely lost. And I was like, wait a second, I'm just going to double down on both my family, my two daughters and my wife. Connection with myself, my new success metric will be at the end of the day, did I have the impact that I desired? And was it following that place, that domain of inspiring and connecting? And then I just put all of my effort into our 400 employees instead of being the rainmaker and the one that was up on stage, taking all the glory. I said that I was going to impact through them, 98% of whom were millennials and Gen Zers. And it was about 7 months later, after I was digging myself out of this rock bottom, that I introduced myself in an executive retreat, average age being executives, kind of 55. There was 14 of us. And on a whim, I said, I don't really know what I do anymore. I don't really know how to introduce myself, but I'm kind of like the Millennial Whisperer. And these guys, after I shared my story, are like, man, these millennials suck, right? And other guys like, half my millennials are VP or above. What are some of the things that you do? And my immediate response was that we got to take a step back and ask ourselves how we got to this place, first of all. And then as I talked about that, I then said, all right, now here are some of the things that you all need to start introducing into your companies that I've seen to be massively successful, so much so that I actually believe millennials and Gen Zers are some of the best generations to ever come along. It's about how we lead them. And then that's essentially how everything then started to turn.
Wow. Having that experience of your rock bottom, like you said, where your focus shifted from being the rainmaker, being the in the spotlight, to growing your influence through others. What did that transition look like? Is that a life phase that you think
Yeah.
is common to people?
I think everyone at certain points hit a some form of crisis. And if you actually look, I go back to my I was actually a major in human and organizational development. Like, so that once again, like this is something I've always
Mm,
known in myself, like this obsession with human behavior and just this constant curiosity I have of that other person. I love learning about people, right?
mm,
And going all the way back to that course I took on human development, they say crisis catalyzes change. And there are
mm,
four main kind of stages to life. The last one being generativity, which is, grandparents as they're trying to really put a lot of the values and they're looking at more of their legacy and stuff. And in the studies, that crisis is usually the catalyst to get to that next stage. And,
mm,
I think we see it a lot in social media of like do hard stuff and like taking that stuff out. I mean, my rock bottom manifested itself as like almost out of nowhere, these panic attacks
mm,
and me not knowing where it was that I was going or what I was working for. And it was low. I mean, and I call it my resting joy rate. I have a high resting joy rate, right? And
mm,
if you compare even my resting joy rate to my identical twin brother, it's way higher. And one of the problems with social media is that it makes us all feel like we have the same resting joy rate. So we're and everyone's full of crap, right? So it's like the thing that I'd spent so much of my life around building was actually the thing that was tearing us apart. And so
mm,
I took it on as my duty, and it was really more of a survival mechanism coming out of that rock bottom. I had to create a new job for myself at my agency because I knew I couldn't keep going on the road that I was on. And so it was so fulfilling and transformative to myself to be able to see these young people avoid potentially the rock bottom that I had. And, it takes me
mm,
on to even now as I speak really, every other week on stages, the one statistic I go back to the most is the most alarming piece of anything out there is that 11% of people are actually in jobs that match your personality profile. That means 89% of the
mm,
workforce are in the wrong jobs for the wrong reasons. And I saw it in I see it in these different verticals of dentistry, optometry, veterinary, right? Within the specialty healthcare or in the lawyers and the CPAs. And it's so exciting to me to help people understand themselves and then redirect where it is that they can and should go based on how they're wired, right? And
mm,
there's so much opportunity for people to reinvent themselves. And at the end of the day, as I go into whether it be 36,000 person healthcare systems or crane companies or, the Nikes of the world, one of the easiest things that each can do is to make it easier for their especially younger employees to make lateral moves, especially in those larger
mm,
organizations, to something that is more in line with how they're wired. Because you ask people later in life, and I see it with the executives that hire me, they look at me and they're like, Chris, I love everything that you did on stage and stuff. And they make sure no one else on their team is listening. And they're like, now, Chris, I got to tell you, all that stuff, like I believe in it, but I don't have any passions in my job. I'm living a largely inauthentic life, meaning that I'm a different person at work than I am with my family, than I am with my friends. And I don't really know where it is that I want to be going. And I'm 50,
mm,
whatever years old. I'm like, all right, well, here's the good news is that you can start taking action now. I use Culture Index as the kind of backbone to then redirect where it is that they can and should go, because I can immediately in 20 minutes figure out how they're wired and then what that disparity looks like in their job and where they can start taking action. And so I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but like there's just so many easy things that people
mm,
can start doing to move us into this direction of fulfillment, right? Of this expectation, which is a shift from a generational perspective that when I go to work, there's this if you ask boomers and Xers, right, they say you go to work, right? Generally, right? You go to work
Mhm.
for your passions and your hot, like you play golf on the weekend, right? The younger you get, the more of an expectation that those passions and that connection will be met at work.
Mm.
And that is conflicting to what's actually happening, right? And so with that shift, I see comes massive opportunity for organizations to embrace more of this.
Wow. To touch back on where we were,
Yeah.
the at the start of what you were saying, we talk about crises being that biggest point, that biggest opportunity for change, for transformation. And I appreciate that we're both psychology guys. I got a major in psychology, and I love learning about human behavior and what makes for a well lived life. And you had touched on these different stages of life. You said generativity, that's part of Erickson's psychosocial stages of development. And one thing that's interesting about that psychological research is the crisis itself doesn't necessarily guarantee success.
Exactly.
That there is an alternative path where you feel stuck and you're not living authentically, you're not living a happy life. And so tell me more about what you've seen with these executives and how they've maybe been stuck in crisis, or I don't want to say didn't pass the test, but are just, they haven't gotten over that hump yet, and the work that they do to transform themselves.
Sure. So I think the biggest opportunity is just putting more resources into understanding how we're wired, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I always allude to the impact and potency of Myers-Briggs Strength Finders, Enneagram, and Culture Index, Predictive Index. I like Culture Index because it's a quick. I can read it. They can take it under 20 minutes. It takes them under 20 minutes to do it, and I can read it and take immediate action on where they can and should go. And what I find in these organizations is that on the executive level, they're like, yeah, we're totally vibing with you. Like, I get it. And my most difficult audience is actually middle managers, right? These guys
Okay.
that they're being told where it is that they're going. And there are obviously some issues with how that communication is being done, especially in terms of the context piece of why is the C-suite making these decisions that they're
Mm.
making. Autonomy is the second most important trait that especially young people are looking for in leaders, and it's actually context that they crave. And
Mm.
so if you look at these middle managers, what I'll tell them is that the reason why you're so overwhelmed, because they'll hear me speak and they're like, Chris, we're exhausted. We're trying to deal with so much. We can't do all these things. And what I tell them is that the reason why they are most likely so exhausted is they've got the wrong people in the wrong jobs for the wrong reasons.
Mm.
And, especially in these organizations that have tracks that are the rise to the top, whether it be sales driven, producer led kind of software companies are that way, right? And you've got these salespeople that are just pretending to be salespeople because they just want to get to that next level. Whereas they're doing a disservice to themselves because they're having an out of body experience every single day,
Mm.
and so, and that's just one example. You see it in any industry and people feel stuck. And the good news is, regardless of the size of your company, because my favorite companies are actually small businesses because I can have an immediate impact, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that's why I love dentistry offices or dermatology offices or any of those quick fixes, because just by doing some shuffling within your group underneath you or beside you, as well as ahead of you,
Mm.
when you start doing that reshuffling, people get in the jobs that they were wired to do. And the most amazing thing, this is where like the optimistic side of me comes, is that there is a personality profile for every single job out there, right? Like,
Mm.
and I call it my 70-30 rule, right? And generally speaking in life, 70% of our jobs or life should fire us up. and make us feel like we're doing the things that we're born to do. 30% of life just sucks, and 30% of our job sucks, right? And so we've always got to keep that in perspective, and it's leaders' job to make sure that that's in place for the people on their teams. What happens is that when we get into these, especially straight out of school, we don't really know where it is that we can and should go. And we take the path of least resistance or the fastest track. That's not necessarily being true to how we're wired, right?
Mm.
And so with some of that mentality of the reshuffling and allowing people to make those lateral moves, you're going to have instant success in both retention, production, and fulfillment, right? So that's my quick tirade on that.
No, I love it because it can be really easy to, because it's standard in the job market, to fit people into roles instead of maybe trying the other way around of fitting roles to people.
Hmm.
And the success I've seen where you get a little bit creative and you see all things being equal, like we can make sure job descriptions fit compensation and all that HR stuff. But when you start getting creative about how a team operates, then it's exactly as you say, people are going to stay because they've actually found a good fit.
Totally. Totally. And it's interesting because the number one most important organizational trait that people are looking for and what you read so much about is job flexibility, right? Work flexibility. And one of the things that I put in my keynote that actually ended up becoming probably my most viral clip on TikTok and Instagram is that following this point that we've got to expand our interpretation of what that can and should be. And what I mean by that is it's much bigger than just allowing people to work from wherever they want to work coming out of this, the pandemic into the hybrid, into the all office, not all office, and just put that to the side. Right. And, for a lot of people, that's not an option, right? They got to be in the office. They're getting paid hourly, like whether it be a warehouse or like, any of these doctor offices, hospitals,
Right.
et cetera. Right. And so I talk about this company in California that on your 1 year job anniversary, you're allowed to create your own job description with the caveat you can start doing that job if everyone else on the team gives it the thumbs up. And I'll actually have audiences guess the company that does this. And people typically are like, Google, Uber, Facebook. And it's like, no, it's actually Morningstar Tomato Farms. And if you read the case study on Morningstar, it's an amazing thing. They actually do it every 2 months. And it's super organized. And there's a process to how they allow people the freedom to start pursuing the things that as they're learning about themselves and the job, they see opportunity and can once again choose more of their own adventure versus saying, this is the line, this is kind of what everyone needs to follow. And you then also read their productivity stats, their everything, their statistics are some of the best. It's one of the best retention rates of any organization out there. And you ask, oh, well, why is this? Well, it's because they're truly empowering their employees to choose more of their own adventure.
You remind me of another research thing called the competing values framework, where along one axis there's the difference in work cultures over stability or flexibility. And like you had mentioned, there are going to be plenty of roles and plenty of industries where stability is the thing that needs to be prioritized. But even within that, there's opportunity to create more of what you're saying and get people engaged and involved. So what attitudes or ideas have you seen overcome towards a more flexible culture?
The biggest piece, this is the biggest pushback that I get. And it's the mentality with crossed arms. Well, I had to do it this way. Why don't they? Seriously. And once we can overcome that, we start getting in the right direction. But I mean, if you want to break down the statistics, really for every organization right now, for the most part, is struggling with retention, attracting talent, and morale. right? And so there are two knobs that we can essentially start toggling. One, which is easier than the other, which is organizational. And that's that work flexibility, that's the pay, benefits. We see so many companies throw more and more money at salary, where once again, you break down the statistics. That's not actually the one that we need to be relying on the most. It's just that's the easiest thing from the C-suite to start impacting some of the numbers that they're seeing immediately. So that work flexibility on the organizational knob is super, super important. Then we have the more difficult knob, which is leadership and culture. Culture is a byproduct of leadership. And the three most important leadership traits, especially through the lens of millennials and Gen Zers, is inspirational leadership, autonomy, and transparency. Okay. Along that, we have things like the need for continuous learning, which I would bucket under more of that organizational thing. And like when I talk about continuous learning, put courses in place for people to better understand how they're wired, right? Whether it be investing in Enneagram or Culture Index or one of these tools, because everyone craves that. I talk about purpose courses, right? Like where I'll actually do training with people around understanding how each one of them is wired, right? Like let them put that stake in the ground. But then the leadership one, that takes more time. It's why I actually just finished my online course. That it's not like a normal online course. I get people to work in small groups by instigating some of these ideas and thinking with questions, right? And then I have them collaborate on their own within these teams. But it takes time to start impacting those three pieces. And we can dissect any which of those: inspirational leadership, autonomy, transparency, if you want to.
Sure. Yeah, I think depending on where this falls, my question again would be along the lines of like, what are the blocks? And one thing I see often when it comes to understanding yourself better, understanding someone else better, is I don't want to be put in a box. Like we're people, not toys or something like that can be easily categorized. So,
Sure.
what have you done to, or have you seen that successfully gets over that hump too?
So it really does come down to connection.
Hmm.
And, so one of my favorite tactics is, everyone has one-on-one meetings, right? And it was an executive with a Fortune 100 company that told me that when he sits his 16 direct reports down, he always gives them the option to either talk about work or talk about life. And 80% of the time they end up talking about life. And he said, what's been amazing about that experiment now 2 years in, as I was talking to him about this, is that work comes up on a whim, right? Like when you actually have that connection with them, talking about what they might be going through with their partner or their kids, and it could be good or bad, right? Taking a vested interest in their lives and being a resource and taking on that role of being just as much a mentor and coach as what we've traditionally seen as the boss. When that happens, everything else starts happening organically, right? And so if we actually refocused our roles as leaders to double down on that connection, which is what a lot of my kind of tactics and thought leadership is around, everything else starts falling into place. And that gets us into, I know one of your upcoming questions is like, from a generational perspective, like what are we starting to see in terms of that tension everyone is feeling? And I go to two main contributing factors for that. One is the impact of social media on especially young people, right? So younger millennials and Gen Zers don't have as much of that interpersonal muscle because face to face, because so much of their upbringing was done here on Snapchat and elsewhere, right? But yet there's some benefits to that, right? They embrace digital mediums and it's innate to them. And so innovation kind of comes naturally to them. So once again, how do we weigh those two things while also helping our young people develop more of that interpersonal muscle while they're at our workplace? And then the second piece is parenting, right? So if you take any boomer, especially an older Xer, you will hear that their parenting, when they sat down at the dinner table, it was very authoritarian. And I, as a very young Xer, so I'm 43, so I'm right on the line of Xer and millennial. My dad was British, and I was raised like an Xer and boomer, in that when I sat down at the dinner table, in his very stern British accent, my father would say, "How are your grades? Are you?" I mean, even if I was slouching, he
Hmm.
would pull up my hair because I was
Hmm.
slouching. It was, you fell into line, right? And so when I graduated from Vanderbilt and I got my first job, I saw the boss through that same lens as my parents. Tell me how high it is that you want me to jump, and I'll go 5 times higher, right? You juxtapose that to really anyone 36 and younger, which is mid millennial down to now Gen Z with the 24, 23, 22 year olds. They aren't even sitting at the dinner table. They're playing beer pong out back. They're ripping on a jewel, and they're talking about who they just hooked up with. It's much more of a camaraderie and a
Hmm.
connection that their parents took on more of this coaching and mentoring peer role. And to also, a lot of times, too far, right? Like the snowplow parenting and the helicopter parenting, they
Hmm.
don't necessarily have some of these tools to deal with conflict, etc., because their parents were always there to get it out of the way. And so as we're dealing with all those pieces, right, it creates this very dynamic, conflicting thing that a lot of organizations are struggling with, that I try to help them overcome.
Hmm. Speaking on the that mentorship relation between generations, in my personal experience, I've felt opposite extremes where, say, on one end, I'm asking a superior, well, they give me an assignment, I fulfill it according to their directions. They say, no, that's not what I want. And I ask, okay, what do you want? And they say, that's for you to find out. That's a great question. So I say, but I asked it. And they leave me to figure it out. And maybe that's like one of those Mr. Miyagi great, lessons to learn on your own. But it also sort of feels like I'm throwing you in the pool and you're going to figure it out how to swim. What Where's the best between these things? How do we approach that more coaching relationship in between generations?
Sure. Well, I mean, tactically, people just want to, at the end of the day, like, let's throw everything out. As human beings, we all want to be loved, accepted, recognized,
Sorry.
and a part of something bigger than ourselves. That was amazing. How old is she? That is so good. That was amazing. That was like almost scripted.
That was my wife Miranda and my little girl Ruby.
How
She's
old is
two
Ruby? Oh, I
two years
love it.
old. Yeah.
Yeah, mine are 13 and 11. Enjoy the twos.
Yeah. I need to get a door that locks.
Oh, you're good, dude. That's awesome. That was hilarious. Your wife was very fast at
She is.
retrieving her.
Yes, she's good.
So I don't know what I was talking about.
Right. The coaching relationship between
Mm.
generations. How do we get towards that?
Yeah, so tactically, right? Knowing that we all just want to be loved, accepted, recognized, and a part of something bigger than just ourselves, right? Like that we all crave connection. We're all social beings, even introverts, extroverts, whatever, right? And so one of the places that I like to go is that, you look at that need for transparency, and transparency being more of context, right? Why are you making the decisions that you're making? If you look how boomers were raised and Xers, it was, if something doesn't go your way, you carry the brunt of it and you tell your team everything's going to be fine. We're doing a great job. Just keep steering the path. Whereas, and let's just say you lose some new business pitch, right? They're like, okay, yeah, we lost it, but we're going to keep cranking and go the other way, right? We're going to keep going this direction.
Hmm.
Whereas instead, what we should be doing is getting everyone together and making them feel a part of the process, and having a candid discussion around what worked, what didn't work, and what we can do better collectively, right? Now, it's still up to those people that have had all this experience to talk about where it is that we can and should go, what we learned along the process, but also allow people to feel like they have a say in that direction as well, even if it's with a lot less experience, right?
Hmm.
When we have that discussion, when we just go through those 3 columns, you're taking 5 steps forward in not only getting better, but also making people feel part of that general direction as to where they're going. So I use that as an example of coaching and mentoring goes both sides, right?
Mm.
And I've worked with companies like Coke where they do true reverse mentorships where the executives at Coke will actually get into the nitty gritty with these reverse mentorships, and they're not allowed to, they're just there to learn, right?
Mm.
And so coaching and mentoring goes both ways. And we all crave to feel like we have a vested voice in where it is that we can go. It's when those people feel like they're not recognized, they're not able to steer the ship, or that what they do isn't contributing to that kind of progression. That's where you run into issues.
Mm. I imagine that a lot of leaders may feel upset or feel friction against these ideas. They may feel like they should be learning from me. I shouldn't. I don't want to say stoop to their level. That doesn't sound right. But
Sure.
where does the humility come from? How do we access that in developing these relationships? And even on the other side, because millennials may feel like I keep having to teach them how to save a PDF kind of deal, where
Sure.
there's not intelligence in certain areas and they just criticize each other instead.
Well, a lot of it comes down to communication. And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, and in most organizations, I had a guy, he reached out to me. He was like, Chris, anytime I bring someone in my office, they, especially young people, they start crying before I even open my mouth. I don't like that. I'm not even saying anything, right? Like, and they start crying on cue. And I said, well, when are you bringing them into your office? And he said, anytime they do something wrong or for their annual reviews. I was like, all right, listen, I'm going to teach you the art of the flyby, right? Which is that you have to be connecting with your people more organically, more often. And when you're interacting with them, don't just keep it to work, right? Ask them how they're doing as humans. And in a virtual world, send a video text message to check in on your people. And you look at this even feedback loop, right? You can't wait for the annual review to tell them what they did wrong 9 months ago. And so instead, feedback needs to be given within 24 hours, and you got to ground it in data and contextualize it with that. When you do that, you'll find, statistically speaking, everyone wants feedback. And, with a little bit of a velvet hammer to this gentleman that I was helping, right? If you just go at it with that, also knowing that feedback can be positive when someone does a great job, like go ahead and celebrate those too. When you start doing that, you get more of that organic loop of just refinement and getting better and starting to redirect versus these massive redirects with stupid annual reviews. Like, what a joke. Seriously, like how big of a joke is that? Or, even like some of these qualitative surveys that companies will send out about morale and culture, and they get the read like 6 months later. Like, this stuff needs to be more real time.
Mm-hmm. You remind me of some research that I became aware of through David Epstein. Has a TED Talk. He wrote a book about range, and in it he explains that there are broadly two different categories of learning environments. There's the kind learning environment and the wicked learning environment. And the kind is like you're saying, where feedback is immediate, it's accurate, people know what to do next time. In contrast, the wicked learning environment, feedback is not immediate, feedback may not even be accurate, and you're supposed to figure out how to navigate through that landscape. So, as leaders take on that role of making wicked environments more kind, how do we give recognition to that effort?
Mm.
Because again, as you've said before, that it's a leader's responsibility to give recognition, especially to millennials. But perhaps how can we as millennials or just the younger people in the org give recognition for that effort?
So I mean, I think over communicate everything, right?
Mm,
And like what's interesting, especially as you get into Gen Zers, they're going to immediately go to like, I'm going to type out a thank you or whatever, right? And the more we can do in person, right? So it's a
mm,
hierarchy of connection, and this is more leading towards my second book, which is more connection outward, networking, and sales. But if you look at that hierarchy of connection, there's nothing better than person to person, right? And then the next best is either Zoom or video. I move everything to video text message. Almost all of my
mm,
texts are video text message because I want people to see my excitement and hear my excitement and for it to be more real. And then you have the text message and then you have the email. And then so the more that we can go and reach out to someone in person and say, thank you so much for doing this or for doing that. And the same is true for connection inward, right? Or what I call the flyby, which is that it's up to leaders to organically create that connection with the people on their team in a authentic way. And so the art of the flyby is on a weekly basis, what are you doing to actually create a light touch point? And so interpreted the wrong way, I had the executive of a pretty well-known CEO call me and was like, Chris, what the hell did you tell, you know, X name, right? Because he's now scheduled dinners with all 30 of his direct reports and we don't have time for investor relations meetings. And I was like, oh gosh, he misinterpreted what I meant by the art of the flyby. So I called him. I was like, listen, all you have to do is just get out of your seat and go and see those people. Like, I mean, when you're hopping on that plane, make sure you're having a 10-minute touch point with and just walk around, right? And the flyby isn't necessarily a long dinner. It's a quick touch point showing them that you care about them and that you see them as individuals and humans. And so I worked with a bunch of dentists, and there was this guy out of Boston who was pushing back on this connection thing. He was like, Chris, I have a hard time doing this in my data. I'm in the chair all day, right? And then I've
mm.
got 16 people in this office. It's really difficult for me to pull this off. And I said, all right, his name's Dr. Tish, and I'm actually allowed to use him as an example. He said, now, because where I got the biggest pushback was here. I said, okay, Dr. Tish, where's your office, right? Like, where is it that your kind of headquarters? He said, in the back of the office, I have, a glass office. I was like, okay, where's the punch out clock for a lot of these people? And he said, in the front. And I said, all right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to move your desk for Mondays and Fridays only, or Mondays and Thursdays, whatever makes the most sense. But when people are clocking in and clocking out, it's going to force that flyby for the 1 hour that they're coming or going. But you got to promise me that you're not going to yell at them for coming in late or leaving early.
That was my
And he goes,
first thought.
right? He goes, yes, absolutely. And I said, then Dr. Tish, when they're coming in, you got to ask them something about what like whether it be you knew they were going to Cape Cod for the weekend. How was your trip? Like, start getting some of these interpersonal cues to then develop a genuine and authentic connection and show that you're taking a vested interest in them. And so I met up with Dr. Tish when I was actually doing a speech for the MBA crew at Harvard, and I had breakfast with him, and he said, Chris, that was the single greatest tactic that you taught me that I put into practice, and our retention rate went from 40% to zero, legitimately zero. And I
Mm.
really haven't changed that much else outside of just really making it a priority to create an authentic connection with my people. Anyways, that's my long tirade on that
No, I
stuff.
love that because there is a book called Unreasonable Hospitality where it's about 11 Madison Park, rated the best restaurant in the world, and it all came down to what got them that rating, that accomplishment was in all the little things of establishing connection, showing thoughtfulness, and making things easier for the customer. And I think it can be easy for any organization to be thinking about end user, customer, client, but forget that the people inside the organization need to be taken care of in a similar way. And
Hmm.
so as we show that same thoughtfulness as leaders, then we don't have to worry as much about customers staying because the people that we're keeping in the org are going to help them stay as well.
Totally.
Wow. So let me ask you, Chris, what, let's just say from your book, Millennial Whisperer, what are some things we haven't touched on yet that you feel will be very important for our audience to know about?
Well, the most important trait that anyone in any organization is looking for out of a leader is inspirational leadership.
Hmm.
Now, here's what's so interesting about inspirational leadership is that you ask any leader whether or not they're inspirational, 90% of the time they're going to say, yes, I am. And so let's just say, Ed is head of 16 people in your company, and you say, Ed, are you inspirational? Ed's going to say, oh, yeah, my crew, when I bring them together on Monday mornings, they laugh at my jokes. They're showing up on time. They're absolutely, I'm inspirational. And then you go, okay, thanks, Ed. And then you go to two people on Ed's team. And your first question is Ed an inspirational leader to you all? Their first question back is Ed going to find out if I tell you the truth? I was like, no, this is anonymous. They go, hell no, he's not. He thinks he's so funny. He doesn't give us any real insight as to where we're going. And, he's not inspirational. And I struggled with this concept of inspirational leadership in that, you know, how do we actually demonstrate this to all archetypes in leadership, especially massive introverts, right? And
That was
because
right where
my
my mind went. Yeah,
so my
please.
favorite interpretation was actually brought to my attention by Tony Robbins's team as I was doing some work with them, and they go, the biggest issue with inspirational leadership is LAE, and I was like, what's LAE? And they go, low ass energy. We got to be bringing HAE. So many people bring their people together and they have no energy, right? So what are you doing to bring HAE? So I ask any leader, especially if they don't know whether or not they're inspirational or they're they're struggling with kind of that attendance or hype, right? When we do have those very few chances of getting everyone together. And I had this massive introvert reach out to me who was also a doctor. And he said, Chris, I don't know how to bring HAE. Like that doesn't come naturally to me. And I said, well, listen, how often are you bringing your office together as the main, practicing doctor there? And he said, every Monday morning at 7:30. I said, okay, well, one of my favorite ways to bring HAE is to set the vibe with just some upbeat music. What if you use some music? He goes, oh my gosh, Chris, I've got it. I'll report back. And he hangs up on me. His name's Dr. Trey. And Dr. Trey calls me 6 weeks later. He goes, holy cow, Chris. You won't believe what has transpired at my office. And I said, well, tell me, Dr. Trey, what do you do? He goes, all right, well, every Monday morning at 7:30 over the loudspeakers in our office, I play Shaka Khan's Tell Me Something Good. And that's everyone's cue to go to the break room, to kick off our week, to set the vibe right, and to tell me something good. And what they all do is they tell something good of what someone did for them or something they had accomplished or someone that had helped someone out, whatever it is. And Chris, it takes zero energy out of me. And I'm able to finally bring the HAE. And I love that as a point, these tactics that we aren't necessarily dipping into are so simple in nature, yet a lot of times we're too scared to just try them out. And what I tell audiences towards the end of my speech is the worst thing you can do is nothing at all, right? Like, and even when you make it to the certain level, we've all got to be aspiring to take it to the next level. So that's one of my favorite tactics. And the other place that I think is a fairly easy place to start dipping is with rewards and recognition. And so a lot of times people are under recognized and under rewarded or reliant on the wrong things for the wrong reasons. And so every organization, as they're gut checking their vibe and their culture, they should have a top-down rewards and recognition and a peer-to-peer system. And I'm not saying that we need to overly reward and recognize, right? What I am suggesting, especially with the top-down, is that you have to have at least something, I think monthly, if not quarterly, not annually, bigger than annually, that rewards and recognizes some of your top performing statistically employees, or allows you to revisit some of those values that you have deep inside your website that no one knows, but to demonstrate and bring to the forefront people that are demonstrating that with stories, and then rewarding them in using that to do on a monthly basis. And my favorite example of this is a company also out of California that during like kind of like the 2012, 2013 tech boom resurgence in social media, Facebook and Google were like, what the hell are they doing at Domo? Domo was a software sales company, very producer sales led. And in their converted warehouses in San Francisco, they, on everyone's first day, you'd fill out all your paperwork, you'd sit across from the HR leader, and the last question she would ask you is, so what do you want your at-bat song to be if you're going up for your at-bat? Or, you're going for that speech. What do you want to play over the loudspeakers? And you're kind of like, all right, that's a weird question, Mr. or Mrs. HR person. But All I Do Is Win by Khalid, or We Are the Champions, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah,
And
nice.
then people kind of forget about it. And then on the first day of every month, what they do for the rewards and recognition is they play the at-bat song of the number one producer, whoever had the most sales. That at-bat song blares over the loudspeakers, blue sirens go off on the top of the rafters, and they take a 10-foot big blue rooster on wheels to sit next to that person's cubicle for the duration of the month. And how many cash rewards do they get? Zero. They give away a big blue rooster. And so I'll ask audiences, what is your big blue rooster? And it's interesting now that I have the feedback loop on instigating this with my speeches. There's a crane company that's led by a friend of mine that I did an engagement with. And they now have the Rock Star of the Month award because they're like, we don't have a big blue rooster. And it's a trophy of just a bronze cast hand that's like this. And it's a Rock Star of the Month. A lot of his employees are in the field. And what he does is he will fly to wherever that Rock Star of the Month is, and he'll hand it to them. He'll create a short video, and then he'll text it out to everyone else at the company. And he also reported back. He was like, Chris, that was the greatest thing that I've ever introduced, and has had a massive uptick in not only the morale, but people's work ethic. At the same time, you need peer-to-peer recognition, right? So how are you putting it on your employees to allow them to recognize one another? My favorite tactic to that one is I will open up all hands meetings just with snaps. And I'll just say, Sam, thank you so much for going above and beyond and crushing it in that meeting. You really came through, snaps. And then they give snaps to one another. And it ends up creating this amazing environment of recognizing each other, camaraderie, etc. So I think in like my bag of tactics, those are some of my ones that I may have left out.
I love it because living here where I am, just south of Bentonville, Walmart headquarters, having read Sam Walton's biography, I learned that back in the 70s when he was still there, that and he was building everything, he did all these sorts of things, that there was room and time to put all this energy into recognition and reward. What I see a lot of millennials complaining about on Reddit or social media, wherever, is all of these things that may be silly. They may be calling someone out for recognition, maybe giving them cash rewards, whatever, perks, but it lacks authenticity. There's not the actual connection isn't made. And so maybe you could speak one last time on this, on and how can we make sure that the authenticity is there? And maybe it relates to understanding ourselves better.
Sure. So what better way to demonstrate that you understand someone than giving them something? It doesn't have to be super valuable and from a monetary perspective, right? But if you know that someone on your team is obsessed with, I'm looking over at my yellow golden retriever, yellow golden retrievers, and you give them something instead of just an Amazon gift card, but something that talks. And maybe it's you get it made on Etsy, and it's their dog, a picture of their
Mm.
dog that just, and it's a shirt or it's a mug or whatever it is. It shows that you are valuing them and what makes them that individual through that thing that you're giving them, right? And I love gift giving, and no one says it better than John Ruland with giftology. And John is a master at this and has written a book called Giftology that's all about the power of gift giving. And I put that once again also in that domain of rewards and recognition. But you look at how so often we don't necessarily give your own leaders control over what it is that they're able to give their people, right? Like instead of giving them just a stack of Amazon gift cards, give them a budget to do it the way that they want to do it, right? And you also you find a similar, like that autonomy, allowing your people, instead of saying everyone needs to do this, you look at like even team bonding events, right? Which in today's day and age, they're so when we bring our people together or when departments gather, it's so important that we are doing it in the right way, because we don't have near as much of it in a lot of cases as we used to. And I use it as an example of allowing subcultures to thrive, because the subcultures of any organization, sales is going to be very different than that of accounting, than that of the C-suite, et cetera, et cetera. They're all different. And you got to allow them to be who they are. And I was working with a company, and it was super interesting because we were breaking down kind of their employee benefits from a creative standpoint of where it was they're getting creative with these employee benefits. And I saw a line item for Top Golf, and it was big, right? And they would
Mm.
do it twice a year. And then I started asking around, and the sales team, they're like, "Oh man, the Top Golf event is the best, right? We get together, we can hang out, we can let our guard down a little bit. There's music and whatever, right?" And then I got to the accounting department, and this woman that I was talking to from the accounting department, as we talked about the Top Golf thing, she was like, "I hate it. I mean, it's loud. I don't even like golf. I don't drink, right? It's
Mm.
the last thing I want to do." And I said, her name was Cheryl. And I said, "Well, Cheryl, what is it? If I were to allow you to do your own event with accounting, what is it that you would do?" And she said in a very accounting type fashion, "Let me get back to you, and I'll also create a budget for you." And the budget
Mm.
and idea, what she came back to me with was she needed $180 to pay for her accounting department to go to this cat cafe where they go and pet cats and sip tea.
Wow.
And she said, "Chris, if you can help me get this approved, that would go so far for creating, once again, better morale and vibe in our accounting department." And so I got them $180. They went to the cat cafe, and the feedback, you would have thought they were just sent around the world on an all expense paid trip. Like it was, they
Mm.
just got to be who they were, right?
Mm.
And so I use those as examples, Sam, because let's stop trying to be all things to all people and
Mm.
elicit and empower our leaders to be who they are, more so by letting go a little bit of that control.
Of course. And I love the point you're driving home, that really connection and leadership, it comes down to thoughtfulness. And there can be budgets behind all that and other considerations that need to be well thought through, but when someone feels seen, that's when your mission's been accomplished.
Totally. And we've got to get away from this idea that everyone needs to be all things to all people.
Hmm.
Because some people, when you say those things, right, the thoughtfulness, you think through some of the tactics, it sounds exhausting and way outside of what might come naturally to them, and that's okay. Like, continue to lead in that domain of expertise, but why are we not looking at pairing people up? Find that yin to your yang of someone like me. Like this stuff, I live for gift giving and getting people fired. I mean, my whole purpose is to inspire and connect. And I can guarantee you, somewhere within your organization, you can pair yourself up with someone that can act as a little bit more of that yin to your yang, so you can stop having to do all those things, right? Like, so I think a lot of people are overwhelmed because they're seeing what it is that we all need to be. And say, screw that, right? Let's all better understand how we're wired and start then pairing up and acting truly as a team in those places that not only are we wired, but we get fired up around.
Hmm. I love that. I mean, here we are very much focused on playing to your individual strengths, and it lends itself to collaboration when done well. But
Totally.
Chris, to wrap things up, this is something I ask all my guests. What does courage mean to you? And how does that play out in your life?
Yeah. I mean, courage to me it's about surrounding yourself with the right people to take that ultimate step forward. Right. And I say that because I look at even my own road, right? That's gotten me to right here. There's no way I could have the courage without having a connection with the people around me. That's why my whole platform is around connection, right? And I would encourage more people, encourage to surround themselves and double down on a few people that can help give them that confidence to continue to move in the direction of progress, because it is in progress that joy is found. And when we feel like we are moving forward, that is where joy lives. That's where we all need to be focusing more effort and time. But unless we surround ourselves with the right people to give us the confidence or act as that sounding board, and in some cases, courage is hearing from someone saying, Chris, you should not do that. That's a
Hmm.
massive distraction, right? And because that to me is, once again, courage to me follows connection. And so, and listen, like as an entrepreneur now off on my own, I could not do what I'm doing without courage, but it's just as true the other way, that I don't know if it would be as fun if it wasn't a little bit scary, right? So I love that. Once again, what a great platform courage is and can be for so many people.
Absolutely. Chris Tuff, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, so actually the best place to connect with me is on Instagram, Tuff TUFF22. I'm usually pretty quick to respond there, or LinkedIn / Christopher Tuff. And then you can check out kind of my keynotes and resources and all that at Chris Tuff, CHRISTUFF.me. And yeah, you'll find I'm actually pretty easy to get in touch with.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Chris. I'm Sam, the Courage Coach for Executives. And remember, it starts with you.